Hey guys, happy almost landfall here. We were waiting for it eagerly. Unfortunately, some news with this storm. It has slowed a bit in its forward motion, still heading to the north, but it was moving at 12 miles per hour. Now this thing has slowed down, moving at 5 miles per hour. So we are seeing some changes now as the storm approaches landfall. We're not there yet, but very soon we hope to get there. This afternoon, we'll see Cristobal making its way onshore. Winds have remained steady at 50 miles per hour. That's maximum sustained winds. And of course, these tropical storm force winds do extend quite a ways out from the center here. We've seen a couple of problems along the Gulf Coast because of the storm. So I want to take you to the imagery now. Looks pretty similar to how it has been, a somewhat disorganized storm here on the infrared satellite imagery. You see those bright reds, yellows, and oranges denoting some of the strongest thunderstorms that we've seen in association with the rain bands as they've continued to move. Once again, pretty boring on the left side of the storm. Dry air wrapping into it, causing those problems with the center. And with that, we've had some issues on the east side of the storm where most of the activity has been, especially in terms of the flooding and the wind potential there, really making things very unpleasant for parts of Florida, even parts of Georgia, into Alabama, Mississippi, and of course Louisiana, where the storm is quickly approaching. We've had some issues with the eye today, where it's been somewhat unorganized, hasn't really been able to get its act together because of that dry air wrapping into it. But nonetheless, the impacts remain here along the Gulf Coast. Although Texas hasn't really been getting in on the storms, some high tide that happened earlier today near Corpus Christi caused some flooding, and with the Gulf of Mexico churning up like a pool here, definitely not helping there along the coastlines of Texas through Louisiana all the way back out to Florida. So I want to show you some imagery out of Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, where a person here took this video, lives along the coast, and you can see how the water is coming in rapidly on their property. They say it takes about 6 inches to cover the slab of this water, so the water is quickly rising. And it's because of the motion of this storm that we have such a concern for storm surge, particularly in this area and along the boot of Louisiana, which is where we have these tropical storm surge warning and watches in effect. You'll see that darker shade of magenta being the storm surge warning, the lighter shade being a storm surge watch. So that means this is where we could see the most destructive storm surge on the order of about 3 to 5 feet for some of these areas, a little higher in isolated areas. This product takes into account the specific coastline that you see in this area. So it's not a surprise that we've had issues along the Gulf Coast here. And just because other areas aren't under this watch or warning doesn't mean that there isn't the problem of storm surge that could be damaging or dangerous. And we've seen it all along the coastline here throughout the weekend. We'll show you some video now out of Pensacola Beach, Florida, where the waves have been churning all along the Florida coastline, back through Mississippi, as you saw in that other video, and around the coastline here. Some serious problems with the surf being dangerous. You can see it there, some rainfall coming down, heavy at times, those raindrops going almost horizontally across the screen there. This comes from our partners over at Surfline, so you can really see how we're catching in on the action there. I'm going to take you to the current radar across the Gulf Coast where things have been very active. We actually have a tornado warning that has popped up now here in central Florida, so we'll zoom into that a little bit closer. Yesterday, an EF1 tornado came through downtown Orlando, so things were very busy here. This looks to be a tornado warning moving through Lake County near Leesburg, so if you're watching us from this area, please take cover, go to your safe place, because even though these tend to be somewhat quick tornadoes that move through the rain bands, you definitely want to take this very, very seriously. I'll put some velocity on this so we can see. This shows the wind direction of the storm and the winds in relation to the radar. So I'll have to turn on the radar here for Tampa to show you that. But this rain band, you can see that area of purple showing the heaviest rainfall associated with this batch of storms moving on through the area. So problematic day throughout much of the Sunshine State. And we still have a couple more hours of this, folks. We're going to be seeing the storms moving on through as we head on through today. We will expect to see that landfall happen today, so that's the good news with that. We will see Cristobal come on shore today. And of course, once it does that, it will weaken. Something to keep in mind, though, as the storm moves on land and begins to weaken, those strongest winds, the the span of those strong winds begins to spread out. So other areas will be dealing with a chance for tropical storm force gusts or winds. So definitely if you're anywhere near this area along the Gulf Coast near Cristobal, you'll have to be careful because they could definitely pose some very big problems where you are. Best to stay hunkered down. We saw some folks over at the beach near Siesta Key, and that is not where you want to be at this time. Lots of folks out there. We saw some by the lifeguard station, thankfully. If you are going to be out at the beach and take that risk, it's best to be near the Gulf, the lifeguard station there, because you know, it's very dangerous with this surf. But this is a kind of problem we'll be seeing throughout the next several hours as the bands continue to push on through for this area and all along the Gulf Coast. So hang in there. This is not a sprint, definitely a marathon. That's the slogan from our Chief Meteorologist, Leslie Hudson, as we go through these storms. Definitely problematic, can be tiring and weary, but we're almost done. And thankfully, although this is our third storm in just the beginning of the season here, you know, thankfully this isn't something that has been more catastrophic. That's not to downplay the problems of this storm, but definitely the better bet here with this storm moving on through, where we're dealing with a tropical storm, kind of a good warm-up for folks here new to the season, and especially if you've just moved to one of these areas that are prone to these storms, then this is a great warm-up for you. But yeah, across Florida, dealing with these storms, heavy batch moving through central Florida, another tornado warning just south of Lake City. This is in Columbia County, includes parts of I-75 just south of I-10 as these storms move on through. Can't seem to pull up the velocity. We'll check this storm, see if we can bring this up. All right, we've got it on this. And what this shows us, the red is wind that is going away from the radar, green going towards the radar. So when you have that opposing direction, that shows us that there's some rotation in this storm, and that could be indicative of a tornado. Probably here on this southwest corner of Columbia County is where we're looking for this couplet. And that storm was moving to the northeast here. So as we take you through it, we're likely to see this continue to move through parts of the local area over the next 33 minutes through parts of Lake City and through Bass, Florida is where we'll see this storm move. So you're in this area, please take cover now. Go to your safe place and allow this storm to pass. These bands are moving fairly quickly through the area. So that's both a good thing and a bad thing. A good thing because if you're in this area, the threat will be through very soon. But we'll continue to see more of these bands coming through, and we have known that the likelihood of seeing a few spin-up tornadoes not out of the question. Again, we saw that yesterday moving through central Florida, and now as some of these bands move through North Florida, not a surprise to see this, but it can be pretty scary. We're here to walk you through it so you don't have to have the concern. We've also dealt with some flooding for parts of North Florida, southern Georgia, and Alabama with this storm. So we've been pretty busy here, folks, rocking and rolling with Cristobal as it's moved further up the Gulf Coast. So it's not just parts of Louisiana and Mississippi dealing with the action here. We've been pretty busy all along the Gulf Coast. You can see those heaviest rain bands off the coast of Jacksonville right here. Some very heavy rainfall rates, some places 5 to 8 inches accumulated in the past 24 hours. So it has been very, very active here. Again, if you are in an area in central Florida or North Florida where we have these 2 tornado warnings, please take cover and go to your safe place. Other folks along the coast, don't be surprised if we see some more activity like this going into the next couple of hours as those rain bands pass on through. Early this morning, there were some tornado warnings through parts of Mississippi. So thankfully, these tend to be very quick moving cells that push on through the area. So while the threat is there and should be taken very seriously, it's usually pretty short-lived. We do have another warning here for flooding through parts of the Tallahassee, just east of the Tallahassee area where I-75 and I-10 kind of meet up towards the state line. That flooding threat is going to stick around even as we head into tonight after the storm makes landfall, just because the moisture wrapping in on this side of the storm. There's a reason why they call it the dirty quadrant, because that's technically where we see the strongest winds, the biggest threat of storm surge, and these rain bands just really don't make it any easier out here, folks. They don't make it pleasant. But we're going to move a little bit further west towards the direction of where Cristobal's center is. Hurricane hunters were in here earlier dealing with this messy eye situation where we couldn't quite pinpoint the circulation. Looked like it was forming a new circulation in just a couple past hours. We saw a new band form very close to what could be the eye wall of the storm that was moving through the coastline just south of New Orleans here in this area of Louisiana, what I like to call the toe of the boot. And so we have seen bands try to wrap in around the storm, but that dry air coming in from the west on this side through parts of Texas and Louisiana have made things very messy for the storm, where it's interrupted that circulation. You know, tropical cyclones, for all my car enthusiasts out there and HVAC people who understand how those systems work, hurricanes, very much the same. You have your intake, compression, exhaust, compression, expansion, exhaust, and it feeds off of those warm Gulf waters. And if you live along the Gulf of Mexico, you know that that's bath water. It's very warm. So when the storm doesn't have that moisture source, when we get that dry air wrapping in, it cools things off, really depletes the system here, and that's good news. That's what we want. We want the storm to weaken as it approaches land, but it's held on so far because of those warm bath waters of the Gulf of Mexico. Dry air not quite strong enough to choke it off completely, but thankfully it has inhibited intensification so far as the storm has trekked across the Gulf of Mexico. So great news there. I'm going to put this radar loop into motion so you can see what's been going on over the past hour or so as these bands wrap up and move closer to the shore of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, of course, and the Florida Panhandle. Like I said, parts of Pensacola have been definitely dealing with the storm surge and flooding. But something that has been interesting, if you notice on the storm surge warning, that was mostly that eastern edge of Louisiana. You can see it follows the motion of these rain bands. I'll draw it out for you here on the map, where we've had these bands flowing in this direction, and with that, the Gulf of Mexico water has also been pushed that way. I like to compare storm surge to when you're swimming in a pool and you go to splash your friend. You have to push that water. That's what these storms do. They push the water inland, and especially for an area that's below sea level, like much of this shoreline here, very problematic for folks out there and dangerous. So you can see that motion there, whereas along this side of the coast, a storm surge watch in effect, because as this comes along the coastline here, less of an angle in which to push those waters inland. So a little bit less of a threat on this side, but still take these advisories very seriously. If you live in this area, do what you can to prepare for the storm. Preparation should be completed by now. The storm is very close to making landfall here, and the fact that it has slowed down and we've had issues with the eye relocating is really what's led to the fact that we haven't had a landfall so far. So in all, the model guidance that we've used for this, the National Hurricane Center has been operating off of, has performed pretty well for this storm in both its track, intensity, and timing for when this thing would come on shore. So all positives there. But let me take you now to those watches and warnings and show you what we're dealing with the National Hurricane Center. We haven't seen any change here in the past couple of advisories, which is very good news. We like to have that stability in the forecast, but tropical storm warnings are in effect for the coastline here. That spans from the Okaloosa-Walton line all the way back west into Louisiana and covers intracoastal city, Louisiana. So parts east of that, between that areas where we have the tropical storm warning in effect. That means we are expecting to see winds greater than 39 miles per hour, sustained winds. Gusts higher than that. There was a report from an oil rig that had gusts almost to 60 miles per hour not too long ago. Report sent in. So we are seeing those kinds of conditions as the result of Cristobal approaching the landmass here. So something to keep in mind. We're going to take another look back at the radar here so we can get a fix on those tornado warnings that we had in Florida. That's the only place we're seeing this right now. Other places along the Gulf Coast not reaching that criteria, dealing with the flooding and definitely wind blowing the rain pretty tough in some of these storms out here. So these warnings still in effect for Lake County, Florida and Columbia County, Florida. So if you live near Leesburg or near Lake City in those metropolitan areas, please take cover now and be very weather aware. If you have your My Radar app handy, you have your location on, it'll be giving you instant alerts for when warnings like this pop up and other information you need to know about the storm. And if you want to track the storm and see where it's at, where those bands are headed, of course, we've got the app for you that will help you do that and stay safe. Plus, we're live on all of our social media channels right now and on YouTube and in our app to help bring you some of this information. Chief Meteorologist Leslie Hudson will be joining me this afternoon as the storm makes landfall and walk you through what's going on with Cristobal, the latest information. Now, the next advisory comes out at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Central Time, the National Hurricane Center. That is a full advisory, so we'll likely know what else the hurricane hunters have been finding as the Air Force reconnaissance planes fly through Cristobal to find the latest information. I think that's going to do it for us now, guys. We will see you in the next one. Stay safe and stay patient. This storm will be not in our hair for very long. We'll be through this fairly shortly. Just stay resolute, and we'll be here with you from the My Radar studios.